She called me her forever, but every time it mattered, I was treated like something she could lose. It happened quietly, in the way she noticed things no one else did, and in the way she made room for me without ever announcing it. She was already confident when I met her. Early 40s, calm in her movements, the kind of woman who didn't rush her words because she didn't need to prove anything anymore. When she smiled, it wasn't flashy. It was warm, deliberate, like she meant it. I was in my mid-20s then, still learning how to listen instead of trying to impress, still figuring out who I was when no one was watching. Our conversations started small. Coffee that lasted longer than planned. Walks that slowed naturally, neither of us eager to be the first to leave. She asked about my thoughts instead of my plans, and when I answered, she listened, really listened. Not the polite kind, but the kind where her eyes stayed on mine, steady and curious, like my words mattered. There was a comfort in being seen like that. The first time she touched me, it wasn't dramatic. Her hand brushed my forearm when she laughed, light but intentional. I remember noticing how natural it felt, like my body recognized something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. Later, when we sat side by side, our shoulders rested close enough that I could feel the warmth of her through the space between us. Neither of us moved away. She never rushed affection. That was part of her power. When she hugged me, she held on just long enough to feel grounding. Not quick, not overwhelming. Her chin would rest near my shoulder, and for a few seconds the world felt quieter. Safe. Chosen. That's what it felt like, being chosen. She spoke about the future softly, not in grand promises, but in small sentences that stayed with me. I don't let many people this close. You feel steady to me. Once, late in the evening, she smiled and said, "You're not temporary." I didn't realize then how deeply that would settle into me. I started shaping my days around the moments we shared. Not obsessively, just naturally. I paid attention to how she took her coffee, how she tilted her head when she was thinking, how her confidence faded slightly when she talked about her past. Beneath the strength was a quiet vulnerability, and I felt honored to witness it. Still, somewhere deep inside, there was a faint hesitation. Not fear, awareness. She had lived a whole life before me. I could feel it in the way she chose her words carefully, in the pauses she allowed. I wondered if I was stepping into something solid, or simply passing through a space she had already learned to protect. But in those early days, I didn't question it too much. Because when she looked at me, when her hand rested on mine, when her voice softened just for me, it felt like permanence. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself believe I belonged there. Her promises never sounded careless. That was the part that confused me the most. When she spoke about us, her voice stayed gentle, certain, like she'd already decided something important and was letting me in on it slowly. She'd say things like, "I'm not going anywhere," usually during quiet moments, when the room was dim, when the world felt smaller. Once, as we sat close on the couch, knees touching, she leaned her head lightly against my shoulder and whispered, "You're my forever." The words settled into me, heavy and warm, like something meant to last. But the days in between began to change. It started subtly. A postponed plan here. A message answered hours later instead of minutes. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could be pointed at and called wrong. Just enough distance to feel, not enough to accuse. When I asked if everything was okay, she smiled and said she was just busy. Her life was full, she reminded me. Responsibilities, history, people who had known her long before I arrived. I told myself understanding was part of loving someone. Still, I began noticing the space between her words and her actions. The way she'd pull away first when we hugged, even if only by a breath. How her hand would slip from mine when we walked, not abruptly, just naturally, like she had somewhere else to be. The warmth was still there, but it didn't linger the way it used to. There were moments when she was fully present, laughing softly, brushing my arm as she spoke, looking at me like nothing else existed. Those moments kept me grounded, hopeful, but they were followed by stretches of quiet, where I felt like I was waiting for permission to matter again. One evening, I caught myself checking my phone more than I wanted to admit. Not because I didn't trust her, but because her absence had started to feel louder than her reassurance. When she finally replied, the message was kind, affectionate even. "I've been thinking about you." And yet, the silence before it lingered longer than the words themselves. I started adjusting, lowering expectations without realizing it. Telling myself closeness didn't need consistency to be real. That love could exist even when it was quiet, especially when it was quiet. But there were moments that stayed with me. Like the time I reached for her hand across the table and she squeezed once, gently, before pulling back to check her phone. Or the way she kissed my cheek instead of meeting my eyes when she left. Small things, easy to dismiss, hard to forget. She still called me her forever, still spoke in futures. But those futures never seemed to include details, just feelings, floating without shape. And I began to feel something unfamiliar beneath the affection. Uncertainty. Not about her feelings, but about my place in them. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to disrupt what we had. I told myself patience was strength, that love meant giving space when it was needed. But in the quiet moments, when I replayed her words in my head, I started wondering why something that was supposed to feel secure was beginning to feel like something I had to hold onto carefully, as if it might slip away if I asked too much of it. That was the first time I felt it. The silence between her promises that I didn't notice when waiting became part of my routine. It didn't arrive all at once. It settled in quietly, like something I accepted without questioning. First, it was harmless. Waiting for her to finish a long day. Waiting for her schedule to slow down. Waiting for the moment when she'd have time to sit with me the way she used to. I told myself patience was love, and love, I believed, was supposed to be generous. But over time, waiting stopped feeling temporary. I began organizing my days around her availability instead of our connection. I learned which hours she was most likely to respond, which days were easier to suggest seeing each other, which moods meant closeness and which meant distance. It wasn't something she asked of me. It was something I taught myself quietly because I wanted to stay close to her. When we were together, she was still kind, still warm. She smiled easily, touched my arm when she spoke, leaned in close when she laughed. But something had shifted in the way she held herself. There was a carefulness now, like she was present but not fully settled. I noticed it one evening when we were sitting side by side, watching the city lights from a balcony. The night air was cool, and instinctively, I moved a little closer. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. There was a small space between us, just enough to feel intentional. I felt it in my chest before I understood it with my mind. Her life, I realized, didn't bend around me the way mine had started to bend around her. She spoke about plans, trips, commitments, ideas, and I was always just outside the frame. Not excluded, exactly, just undefined. When I tried to imagine myself in her future, it felt like trying to hold smoke. There was warmth but no shape. Sometimes I caught myself watching her instead of listening. The way her eyes drifted when her phone buzzed. The way she checked the time without meaning to. It wasn't neglect, it was priority. And I wasn't sure where I stood. I stopped asking certain questions. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want to sound like I needed reassurance. I told myself confidence meant independence. That loving someone older, someone established, meant understanding their world didn't revolve around mine. But understanding started to feel like erasing parts of myself. There were nights when I lay awake, replaying our conversations, measuring affection in fragments. A hand squeeze, a smile, a message sent late. I collected them quietly, as if they were proof that what we had was still real. And yet, the waiting grew heavier. I wasn't waiting for love. She had already said she cared. I was waiting for consistency, for effort that didn't feel borrowed, for a place that didn't disappear the moment her life got full. The hardest part wasn't the distance. It was realizing how easily I'd learned to accept it. Waiting had become a habit, and somewhere along the way, I stopped asking myself whether love was supposed to feel like standing still, hoping someone else would eventually turn back and meet me where I was. I noticed it one afternoon when I was sitting alone, staring at a message she'd sent hours earlier. It was kind, thoughtful even. She said she missed me, said she couldn't wait to see me soon. But there was no when. No effort to turn words into something solid. And for the first time, instead of feeling comforted, I felt tired. That was when it hit me. I wasn't being neglected, I was being managed. I fit into the quiet corners of her life, into moments when things slowed down, into spaces where I didn't disrupt anything she had already built. I was welcome, just not anchored. She spoke about me with affection, but lived as though I could be moved around without consequence. When we finally saw each other again, I noticed how different it felt. She hugged me, but her arms didn't tighten the way they used to. It was warm, familiar, and strangely careful. When I leaned into her, looking for comfort, she patted my back softly instead of holding me close. The gesture was kind. It just wasn't intimate. We sat together talking about ordinary things. Her voice was calm, steady, but her attention drifted to her phone, to the time, to everything waiting outside that moment. I realized I was no longer someone she lingered with. I was someone she enjoyed briefly, and that hurt more than distance ever did. I thought back to all the times she'd spoken about forever, about not letting people close easily, about how different this was with me. I believed her, not because I was naive, but because she sounded sincere. But sincerity, I learned, doesn't always come with responsibility. The truth settled in slowly, heavy, and undeniable. She liked the way I made her feel seen, steady, wanted. But she didn't protect me the way someone does when they know they could lose you. She didn't make space for me when things got complicated. She simply assumed I'd understand. And I did. Too well. I began seeing our relationship clearly, not through moments of affection, but through patterns. I was present when it was easy, absent when it wasn't, spoken to with tenderness but handled with distance. I wasn't part of her foundation, I was something added on, removable without much disruption. That's when the word formed in my mind. Temporary. Not in the way she saw me, but in the way she treated me. It didn't make her cruel. It didn't make her dishonest. It just meant she never gave me the weight she gave the rest of her life. And no amount of warmth could replace that. I sat with that truth longer than I wanted to. Let it settle. Let it hurt. Because once you realize you're temporary to someone who promised you permanence, you can't unsee it. Every missed moment, every softened goodbye, every vague future suddenly makes sense. And the hardest part wasn't accepting how she saw me. It was accepting how long I'd allowed myself to stay in a place where love was spoken like a promise, but carried like an option. It took me months to find the courage to speak. Not out of fear of losing her, though part of me did. I feared losing myself. The quiet ache of waiting, the constant adjustment of my heart to fit into her life, had grown heavy. I could no longer carry it in silence. We met that evening in the small, familiar cafe where our connection had first deepened. The lights were soft, casting shadows across the wooden tables, and the scent of coffee lingered in the air. I noticed the way she laughed with the barista, a casual, effortless charm I had once admired so much. But today, I wasn't watching her laugh. I was listening, preparing my words, feeling the weight of each one before it left my lips. I started slowly, carefully, not letting emotion tip into accusation. "I need to be honest," I said, my voice quieter than I expected, steady with a kind of resolve. "I've been feeling invisible. Not because you don't care, I know you do, but because the way we exist together, it's like I only matter when it's convenient." Her eyes widened slightly, not with anger, but with surprise. The vulnerability in my voice seemed to reach her in a way that words she had spoken countless times never did. She shifted in her seat, bringing her hands together in her lap, her fingers tightening subtly as though she were gathering herself. I continued, "You say I'm your forever, but your actions, they don't reflect that. I feel like I'm part of your life only when you have space for me, not when you truly need me. And I've realized I can't keep existing in that in-between space. I need to be seen, not just noticed. Loved, not just wanted." For a moment, the cafe felt impossibly quiet. The hum of conversation faded. The clink of cups softened. All that existed was the tension between us, the unspoken weight of months spent in longing, waiting, and careful hope. She didn't respond immediately. She reached for her coffee, swirling it absent-mindedly, and then really looked at me. The way she used to when she wanted to understand, when she wanted to see all the parts of me that weren't visible to anyone else. There was a flicker of guilt in her eyes, softened by affection. She said, "Finally, I didn't realize." That simple admission cut both ways. It was a relief to hear, yet it confirmed the truth I had been trying to articulate. Intention alone isn't enough. Love without action is a promise unkept. I reached across the table, brushing my fingers lightly against hers. A hand touch that carried years of accumulated longing. She didn't pull away but didn't fully grasp it either, as if she were testing the moment, learning the depth of my resolve. "I can't keep waiting for someone to choose me when I need them to," I said softly. "I can't be a temporary comfort anymore. I need permanence, even if it means stepping away to find it." She looked down at our hands, and I felt her inhale, the subtle tremor of recognition and regret. No words could bridge the space entirely, not yet. But honesty had entered, sharp and clear, and for the first time, the weight of silence between us had lifted. For the first time, I had spoken my truth. And in speaking it, I realized that sometimes, the bravest act of love is knowing when to ask for more, or when to walk away. After I spoke, there was a pause that stretched longer than either of us expected. The cafe around us continued its quiet rhythm, the low hum of conversation and the occasional clink of cups creating a soft backdrop. But in our little corner, time felt suspended. I watched her hands, graceful, deliberate, twist a napkin, smooth it, twist it again. I could see her wrestling with something, the weight of unspoken words pressing behind her eyes. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was low, tentative, unlike the confident tone I had known. "I've been afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of letting someone in completely. Afraid of losing myself in someone else, of giving too much and having nothing left. I never wanted to hurt you, but I wasn't brave enough to do it right." Her confession hung in the air. I felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief because at last her silence had an explanation. Sorrow because explanations didn't erase months of waiting, of quiet disappointment, of learning to accept less than I deserved. She reached toward my hand, slowly, her fingers hovering above mine. I didn't pull away. I was not angry. I was cautious. I had learned the importance of boundaries, of preserving my sense of self even when my heart wanted to melt into hers. When her fingers finally brushed mine, I felt the warmth, the familiar softness, and the gentle acknowledgement of the bond we had shared. Her thumb traced small, tentative circles on my skin, a gesture of both apology and lingering care. "I care about you," she whispered, "more than I know how to show. But I've made it hard for you to feel it fully. I see that now." I met her gaze, steady, letting her words sink in. The connection between us was real, that much was undeniable. But the emotional imbalance, the patterns that had slowly revealed my temporary place in her life, had left their mark. I could feel them in the tension in my shoulders, in the quiet ache of my chest. I had to honor that part of myself. "I understand," I said softly. "I do. I see your fear, and I'm not blind to your intentions. But I also know that understanding doesn't mean accepting less than I need. Love needs consistency, not just affection when it's convenient. I can't be half a presence in your life and call it enough." She nodded slowly, tears glimmering at the corners of her eyes. Her vulnerability was raw and unguarded, and I felt a pang of compassion. I wanted to reach further, to comfort her fully, but I stayed within the boundaries I had learned to set for myself. To care for someone else without losing yourself in the process was a delicate balance, and it was time I honored it. We stayed like that for a while, fingers entwined lightly, foreheads almost touching. No grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, just presence, shared breath, recognition of what had been, what had failed, and what still lingered between us. In that quiet understanding, I realized something profound. Caring for someone doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes, the bravest act of love is acknowledging when a bond is genuine yet insufficient, and choosing integrity over longing. We parted that evening with a long, steady embrace, a silent acknowledgement of both our connection and our limits. Her cheek pressed against mine, warm and soft, and I felt the weight of what we had shared without clinging to it. It was love tempered by truth, and in that tempered love, I finally felt free. Free to honor myself, free to let her hold her truth, and free to walk away without regret. The day we said goodbye was quiet in a way that almost felt intentional. No dramatic gestures, no loud confessions. Just the two of us, standing in the soft light of the late afternoon, the world moving around us without pausing for our final chapter. The cafe where we had shared countless moments felt emptier than usual, the scent of coffee and warm pastries now tinged with the bittersweet ache of endings. I could see her trying to hold herself steady, her posture familiar yet subtly tense. There was a gentle grace to her movements, the same quiet elegance that had first drawn me in. She reached for my hand instinctively, a reflex of years spent close, and I let her hold it for a moment. Her fingers were warm, delicate, but this time I didn't allow them to linger too long. I needed to be firm, to honor the boundaries I had set for myself. "I care about you," she said softly, her voice catching slightly, "more than I've ever been able to show. And I will always remember what we had." I nodded, letting the truth of her words sink in. And I understood, in that instant, that affection alone wasn't enough. Love without constancy, without mutual presence, could not sustain what my heart deserved. I had loved deeply, yes, but I had learned that self-respect was equally necessary. "I care about you too," I replied. My voice was steady, calm, even though my chest ached with the weight of parting. "And I'll remember it all. But I can't remain where I'm only chosen some of the time. Permanence requires more than words." Her eyes glistened, and I saw a mix of regret and understanding there, the recognition that what we had could not last, not because of lack of care, but because of misalignment. I wanted to say more, to tell her how much she had meant, how much she had changed me. But some truths are understood without words, and some endings need silence to feel complete. We stepped closer, letting the familiarity of our closeness wrap around us one last time. I pulled her into a long, steady embrace, not desperate, not seeking, just honoring. Her cheek rested against mine, warm and soft, and I felt the subtle tremor of her acknowledgement. Fingers intertwined lightly, foreheads almost touching, breaths mingling in a moment of quiet understanding. A soft kiss on the cheek, not of lovers, but of two souls who had deeply mattered to each other, marked the gentle conclusion of our story. It was not triumphant, nor was it tragic. It was simply real. As I pulled away and stepped back, I noticed the way she lingered for a heartbeat longer, as if committing the memory of me to herself. I did the same, absorbing the warmth, the scent, the subtle grace that had stayed with me all this time. Walking away, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and relief. Sorrow for what could have been, for the moments that were bright but fleeting. Relief because I had preserved my integrity, my sense of self, and my understanding of what love required. I was free to carry the memory without being trapped by it. She watched me leave, a quiet, wistful smile on her lips. I glanced back once, just long enough to convey gratitude, affection, and acknowledgement. No words necessary. The bond we had shared would leave its mark, shaping us both, but it would not define the rest of our lives. And in that careful, deliberate parting, I realized that sometimes the most lasting love is the one that teaches you how to walk away with grace, carrying the warmth, the lessons, and the memory, but leaving behind only what can be cherished, never clung to. It was over, and yet, in that ending, something profound remained. Respect, growth, and a love that lingered without needing permanence to validate it.